Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving straight into an absolutely epic 300-year saga that completely transformed the Indian subcontinent. We're talking about the rise, the absolute peak, and the eventual chaotic collapse of the Delhi Sultanate. Now, this isn't just your standard story about kings and conquerors. It's actually a massive masterclass in statecraft, wild economic experimentation, and some truly monumental architecture. We're going to look at how this brilliant administrative machine kept an entire empire running, even while the guys sitting on the actual throne were constantly fighting, being replaced, or, getting assassinated. Okay, let's dive into this. We're going to break this massive chunk of history down into 5 chapters. The foundation of the Sultanate, Alauddin Khalji's absolute control, the Tughlaq-era experiments, the fall to Babur, and finally, the administrative engine. Just to give you a quick mental map before we zoom in, the Delhi Sultanate wasn't just one family. It was really a relay race of 5 totally distinct dynasties, spanning from 1206 to 1526. So we've got the Mamluk, or slave dynasty, then the Khaljis, the Tughlaqs, the Sayyids, and finally the Lodis. And as you'll see, each one brought a completely different philosophy to the table. Starting with Section 1, Foundation of the Sultanate, and establishing the roots in Delhi. Now, while it all technically started with Qutbuddin Aibak, the guy who truly locked down the empire was Iltutmish. He's widely considered the real founder of the Sultanate. Why? Well, because he didn't just conquer things, he organized them. He put together the Dala Chalisa, which was this ultra-elite group of 40 trusted Turkish nobles, specifically designed to project his power and stabilize the realm. He also pulled off this massive diplomatic flex by refusing to shelter a prince who was running from Genghis Khan. By doing that, he literally saved India from the wrath of the Mongols. Plus, to unify the economy, he rolled out a standard currency, the silver tanka and the copper kital, which basically became the financial bedrock of the entire sultanate. Let's move to our second chapter, Alauddin Khalji's absolute control, blood, iron, and markets. To really understand Alauddin, you have to compare him to the founder of his dynasty, his uncle Jalaluddin Khalji. Jalaluddin was this older, lenient guy. He actually said that 10 magnificent forts weren't worth a single hair on his soldiers' heads. He pardoned rebels, tried to avoid bloodshed, kind of a softer approach. His nephew, Alauddin, completely the opposite. He ran strictly on a blood and iron policy. Alauddin seized power and literally bought loyalty by handing out gold. But then, he totally flipped the script and stripped the nobles of their lands. He swapped out those old land grants for cash salaries for his soldiers, which is a big deal because it meant their absolute loyalty shifted directly to the central crown. Now, what's really fascinating here is how Alauddin actually managed to pay that giant standing army in cash without completely bankrupting the state. He rolled out one of the most hardcore price control systems in medieval history. He essentially split the markets into 3 distinct sectors: grain, cloth, and livestock. Then he put strict regulators in charge. You had the Shana-e-Mundi ruling the food prices with an iron fist, the Divani Riyasat keeping tabs on merchants, and the Parwana Navis handing out licenses to stop black market hoarding. And get this, if a merchant tried to cheat customers on weights, flesh was literally cut from their own body to make up the difference. Brutal? Absolutely. But it kept inflation at 0 and made his massive army affordable. This relentless drive for security and control also sparked a huge architectural boom. But these weren't just pretty buildings, they were literal state policy carved in stone. Iltutmish finished the tower in Qutub Minar to project absolute dominance. Alauddin built Siri Fort, not just as a palace, but as a heavily defended military headquarters, designed specifically to hold off those relentless Mongol invasions. And to get water to that massive fortress, he dug out the enormous Hauz Khas reservoir. Then there's the Alai Darwaza, where we see the very first scientifically engineered Islamic arches and domes in India. It was a massive leap forward in architectural tech. Which brings us to Section 3, the Tughlaq-era experiments, genius or madness. Okay, enter Muhammad bin Tughlaq. He is arguably the most brilliantly educated and disastrously ineffective ruler of the entire Sultanate. The guy was a scholar of math, astronomy, philosophy, you name it. Now remember how Iltutmish stabilized the economy with real silver and copper? Well, Muhammad bin Tughlaq faced a global silver shortage, so he tried something incredibly modern, token currency. He basically decreed that copper coins would hold the exact same value as silver. It was a 14th century attempt at fiat money. The only problem? He didn't put any anti-counterfeiting measures in place, so citizens just turned their homes into literal mints, forging copper coins to pay their taxes. the economy completely tanked. And sadly, that was not his only massive misstep. He realized that trying to govern his newly conquered southern territories, all the way from Delhi in the north, was a logistical nightmare. So step 1, he ordered the capital to be moved to Daulatabad in the south. On paper, strategically sound, but step 2 is where it goes off the rails. He forced the entire population of Delhi to literally march hundreds of miles south, causing mass starvation and death along the way. Then, step 3, after finally getting there, he realized his old northern borders were now totally exposed to the Mongols, so he ordered all the exhausted survivors to march right back to Delhi. It was a brilliant strategic thought that turned into an absolute humanitarian catastrophe. After all that chaos, his successor, Firoz Shah Tughlaq, had to step in and stop the bleeding. He did this by simplifying things drastically. He scrapped over 20 confusing, brutal taxes and replaced them with just 4 main ones based on Islamic law. You had Kharaj on land, zakat on Muslim property, jizya on non-Muslims, and khums on war loot. Now, while the religious nature of this taxation was definitely controversial, it did do its job of stabilizing the treasury. Even better, Firoz Shah poured those funds directly into agriculture, constructing this unprecedented, massive network of canals. And honestly, some of those canals still irrigate northern India today, which is just incredible to think about. Moving into Section 4, the fall to Babur and a crumbling empire. So despite those stabilizing efforts, the Golden Age was definitely in the rearview mirror. The later years were pretty grim. Timur's devastating invasion in 1398 basically wrecked Delhi, leaving a power vacuum that the Sayyid dynasty briefly and weakly tried to fill. Eventually, the Lodi dynasty took over. Sikandar Lodi actually brought back a bit of order by moving the capital to a brand new city called Agra. But his son, Ibrahim Lodi, extremely stubborn and arrogant, he alienated all his own nobles. And in 1517 and 1518, Ibrahim faced the surging power of the Rajputs, led by Rana Sanga, and he suffered these absolutely crushing defeats at Katoli and Bari. The Sultanate was fracturing, bleeding from 1,000 cuts, and leaving the door wide open for a new player from Central Asia, Babur. Now, hearing all this brings up a pretty massive question. If these rulers were constantly shifting capitals around, crashing their own economies, alienating their nobles, and, assassinating each other, how did this empire manage to dominate the subcontinent for 3 solid centuries? The answer is right here in our final section, the administrative engine, the system behind the throne. So here's the real secret. The true hero of the Delhi Sultanate wasn't actually any single king. It was the bureaucratic machine, specifically the Iqta system. The empire was just way too massive to micromanage from a single throne room, so they divided the land into provinces called Iqtas. Local officials, known as Iqtidars, were given the right to collect taxes from those specific lands. In return, they had to maintain law and order, and most crucially, they had to keep a standing army totally ready to fight for the Sultan at a moment's notice. It was a brilliant workaround that let a centralized crown effectively govern vast, highly decentralized territories. And meanwhile, back in the capital, while sultans were busy rising, falling, or fighting, this central government machinery just kept humming along. You had the sultan at the top, sure, but the actual day-to-day heavy lifting was done by highly specialized departments. The wazir handled the massive job of finance and revenue. The Diwani-Ars kept the military sharp, auditing troops, literally branding horses to prevent fraud. The Diwan-e-Insha managed all the state paperwork, and the Diwan-e-Rasalat handled foreign affairs. So no matter who was actually wearing the crown on any given day, these clerks, auditors, and administrators made absolutely sure the taxes were collected, the armies were fed, and the borders were secured. And that, ultimately, is why the Delhi Sultanate is so crucial to understand. It wasn't just a random series of conquests. It was the creation of a deeply resilient administrative blueprint, one that merged Turkish military structure with Persian bureaucracy and local Indian realities. This very system, this exact framework, became the bedrock that the legendary Mughal Empire would later use to build its massive wealth and power. It leaves us with a really fascinating thought. While the names of famous rulers eventually fade into history, it's the systems and the infrastructures they build that actually shape the future. So, what modern systems are we building today that will outlast us all? Thank you so much for joining us on this explainer, and stay curious.